Welcome to The Cop and the Shrink, a podcast exploring mental health, law enforcement, and societal issues from the perspective of a police officer and a mental health professional. Have questions about current events, social media, mental health, or police matters? Visit thecopandtheshrink.com. Let's get this episode started with your hosts, Harold Bozeman and Dennis Carradine.
Hey, welcome folks to episode 2 of The Cop and the Shrink. You doing all right?
I'm doing well.
Doing all right. I'm doing fine. We actually got some new merch. So if you check out our nice little coffee mugs here, The Cop and the Shrink, you go to thecopandtheshrink.com, go under our merchandise site. You could buy t-shirts. You could buy tapestry. I heard you could hang us on your wall if you like. You could buy mugs and all that great stuff. And also the money goes directly to the original content. It also goes to the Hospital Heroes Food Drive. We're looking at buying a food truck in the next few months to help bring our festivities over to hospitals, fire departments, and police departments. To date, we have delivered 25,000 meals to 60 locations. New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, all fun stuff. We can keep doing it. We get local restaurants involved. It's all fun.
Oh, we've had great success getting local restaurants. They love to help people.
They do.
Some of our greatest partners have been small local operations here in Delaware. So
the amazing part about that is that outside of any topic that we talk about, remember, we're not only a podcast of fun, because The Cop and the Shrink has to be fun. But look, we're about the community. We've always been about the community. We've always been about trying to get the community together. And I think part of bringing the community together is understanding your resources. We, in the state of Delaware, recently had an officer murdered, in downstate Delaware, and one phone call to a very special person. We were able to get 5 or 6 restaurants involved to bring food down during the funeral services. And that's the power of that local restaurant. That's the power of getting together in a community. So you think about it, 25,000 meals that we've delivered for the Hospital Heroes program is the power of the community. I think pretty cool.
Yeah, and we're not getting paid to advertise for any of these people, but some of our greatest partners have been the V&M Bistro for our pizza. Grotto's Pizza, various locations, and one of our best partners is Mission Barbecue right there in Dover.
When you let's talk about those 3 just for a second. Anytime there is a need, those 3 are right on top. Those 3 are right on top. With the Mission Barbecue, not only veterans, not only first responders, but are there in the community at all times. Amazing. V&M Bistro, Vincenzo and Margarita, 2 amazing sisters up there. But anytime I have a need, give them a call. And then Grotto's, forget about it. Right? We give them a call and say, I think somebody's sad today. And then they will give us 700 pizzas. I think it's insane.
It's got to the point now where, it started out, we had to build relationships with them, but it started out, we call them, we ask, we, had to get things together. But now it's got to the point where if something happens in the community, we have some critical incident, we have some tragedy, they're calling us asking how to help. So yeah. It's actually come a long way, and they've actually been great partners in our community and in these efforts.
So our encouragement to everybody is to get those partners in your community. And if you are part of a police department or a fire department or any first responder, look at your local community, give back, make sure that you're talking to those restaurant owners and see what you can do for them. And I guarantee they will pay back 100-fold. It's always good. We've gained multiple pounds over the years because of how generous that they've been. So, or at least I have. Mine's all still sympathy weight. With a 7-week-old daughter. Oh, she's lovely. So anyway, we're back at episode 2. Got a couple of things to talk about. I posted out a couple of questions like, hey, do you have any questions, topics, and all that? And we got a great topic today for our first section. And the topic actually came from Lodge 5 here in the state of Delaware for the FOP Lodge 5, which they wanted, or at least thought would be a great topic, would be to talk about spouses and how family get stressed based on a law enforcement perspective, meaning that the husband or wife is a police officer, something happens in the department, in the community, and how does that stress affect the family? And I think we both have little perspectives of it. We both have an idea of it. So we kind of have to break it down a little bit. There's a reaction to a critical incident, one of those incidents that go extremely bad, extremely quickly, whether it's a police shooting, whether it's a fire, whether it's a medical emergency or what have you. But then we also have to look at the day-to-day stress and then looking at the psychological response to it, but also understanding the human response to it. I think we're both lucky.
How so?
Well, I would have thought you would have followed up with that, because we both have understanding spouses.
Right. Okay. So I'm lucky in that my spouse understands all the stresses of law enforcement, because we are both in law enforcement, right? So she knows what's going on from minute to minute. Right. We had an incident recently where she was texting me before I was even ready to put out any news of what was happening. Right. So she gets minute to minute updates from people all over. But even if she didn't, even if that weren't the case, if I came home at the end of the day and talked about something that had happened at work, if she came home at the end of the day and wanted to discuss her day, we have the benefit of understanding the career, the stresses of the career, the things that go on, the special needs of people that work in our field. So we have that going on. And you, with your spouse being in critical care and working closely with the police department, she kind of gets it too, right? So we're in a fortunate situation where a lot of spouses that may work in the corporate world and in banking and finance, in family medicine, things like that, they might not understand what a critical incident is and how it affects the people that experience it. And so we're fortunate in that regard that we don't have to educate, so to speak. We don't have to educate our spouses on what we experience. They already know. They work within the system.
I think we try to get a reaction from our spouses now, right? We try to say, like, this happened. This is horrible. We're going out to do this debriefing, and this horrible incident happens. And they both look, well, when you're coming back, can you bring us coffee? Like, literally almost no reaction.
Right. Oh, again?
Right.
Yeah. That's the reaction we get.
That's fine.
What now?
Or we get, oh yeah, you guys are just probably going to the bar. That's yeah, thanks. No. But in all truth, you got to look at it. What attracts, and as we talk about this, is that what attracts us also repels us at the same time. So what attracts people to a marriage, can repel you from a marriage. So let's just put in that perspective, banker or CPA or whatever it is. You marry a police officer, you marry a first responder, those frontline workers, and you have no idea what a critical incident is. And then for those that are listening that don't understand a critical incident is that flashpoint to something pretty intense in a first responder world. So again, like we talked about, line of duty death, fire where there's tragedy, medical mishap, a situation very similar to what Hurricane Ida or Hurricane Katrina or 9/11 or whatever it is, where there's this flashpoint to traumatic response. So let's say you're a police officer, responds to a police shooting, and you come home and your spouse is a bank executive. They have no clue, not one clue, what you're going for. Now, I've heard, and maybe you've heard the same thing, is that when you marry a first responder, you automatically, quote unquote, sign up for that. Like, you should understand that that's going to happen.
You know what? I've always taken exception to that. I don't think anybody signs up for an acceptance of tragedy, right? So right. I think it's appropriate to say they understood it might happen. They understood that they might someday deal with that, but nobody wants it. I don't think it's something they signed up for, right? I hear people say all the time, oh, the police got in a fight, the police got shot, the police were injured. That's what they signed up for. That's the job they do. Right. And I take exception to that. Police don't sign up to get assaulted, get shot, have things thrown at them. That's not what we sign up for. We sign up for...
That wasn't in the contract?
A job that makes a difference in, right. enforcing the laws and providing for public safety, things like that. The negative side effects of that are the assaults, the fights, the shootings and things. That's not what we signed up for. That's just something we understood was inherent to the job.
Shouldn't there... So if we look back, there should be kind of almost a precursor, right? That somewhere along the line, if your spouse is not a first responder, that, okay, no, you're not signing up for the job, but should they understand, or should there be a class, I guess? And I guess, we could probably develop a class for it, but a class like, hey, this is what you're getting into.
I mean, we do it for police officers, right? We've gotten to the point now, it didn't exist in the 90s when I started, but we've gotten to the point now where every police academy gets basic lessons in stress response. The academy is designed around what we call stress inoculation, right? They're intentionally stressed out. They're intentionally pushed to some of their limits so that they can build up a bit of resistance to stress, a bit of a thicker skin, right? So we try to build that into the police by teaching them classes on critical incident stress and on peer support and on stress response. We do that bit of stress inoculation. And it's taken us a long time to get there with police. They've been doing it in the military for decades. Now we're there with police, but we don't do it for police spouses and for significant others. And, I mean, a lot of the reason might be that a lot of people come onto this job fairly young and may not yet be married or in long-term serious relationships. So we can't teach every boyfriend or girlfriend that comes along stress inoculation. But I think that at some point, maybe something should be offered out to spouses of existing officers, existing firefighters that want it, who can come in and maybe just have a seminar on what to expect and on what the police officers go through day to day, because they don't know, and they don't know unless we tell them. Right? Like our dear friend Charlie from FDNY. Charlie tells us a story. He spent 39 years with FDNY, and every day he would come home. Every day, no matter what happened. Pediatric death, house fire, fatal, firefighter injured, building collapse, what have you. Charlie would come home every day, and his dear spouse would say, Charlie, how was your day? And he would say, good. Well, what'd you do or see today? And he would say, nothing. 39 years, Charlie's day was described by good, nothing. Yeah. And his spouse didn't have any clue that it was any different than that, any clue the demons that he was struggling with, anything that he had experienced that he was having a hard time with. She had no clue. And then 40 years in, and he retires, and he's home for a couple weeks, and he falls apart. Because he wanted to tell her all of this stuff. Now that he wasn't going to work, he didn't have to worry about her telling him not to go back. Now that he wasn't going back, he starts to spill all of these things that he saw and that he experienced and that he witnessed, and he kind of fell apart for a little while, he told us. And it wasn't until he sought some clinical assistance that he was able to deal with 4 decades of this trauma.
The demons. Well, I think you have to kind of look at that as well. Isn't there a fear, and maybe fear is a bad word, maybe a hesitation to tell the spouse because they're going to judge you a little bit differently, right? You come home and you say, oh, by the way, I had to fight this guy that, was on PCP, and, we fought him and broke him down, then I had to tase him, and, when you get into that violence, and maybe that spouse looks at you differently. I don't know if that's a hesitation or a fear.
You know what? I think it's probably the healthier choice to make, to come home and talk. You don't have to share with your spouses and your children the grim details of your day. You don't have to share all of the graphic details of everything that happened. You don't have to do that. You don't have to subject them to the trauma. But you owe it to them, in a manner of speaking, to tell them that you've had a bad day and why, and just a general overview of the things that went wrong, if something went wrong in your day, so they understand your mood. Otherwise, you come home and they think you're just a grouchy asshole, and they don't understand why. You come home and you yell at the kids, and you ignore the wife, and you mistreat the dog, and you go sit in your room, and they don't understand why. So I think that we owe it to our significant others and to our children in a kind of a less graphic way to explain why we're in the mood that we're in, or why we're feeling like we're feeling from day to day.
Right. I think that there's also a juxtaposition to it. I know in my world, in the mental health world, we can't say anything. And so I've adopted at least a mentality of that after you finish your notes, at the end of the day, you keep it all to yourself. And it's funny because as a mental health therapist, you're put into a position that says that if you reveal any information on a patient, then immediately it's an ethics violation. And somebody's going to hear it, and somebody's going to jam you up for it. And I'm not, how can I say it nicely? I'm I'm not saying that we eat our own, but we do eat our own. It's almost that we have to police ourselves. If you look at the American Psychological Association's ethics code and even the American Counseling Association's ethics code, it says in its preamble that we police our own. The problem is that when we police our own, it becomes so intense at times, like you're almost waiting for somebody to make a mistake. So when you're making a mistake, you tend not to talk about it. So I have all these stories in my head at the end of the day after seeing 15, 16 patients or whatever. I have all these stories in my head, and I go home and I turn into Charlie. Like, how was your day? Good. I saw patients. Anything that strike you different? No. It's good. Fine. And it's funny because when you go to talk to a colleague, now again, and I said we are a little bit blessed with this. We are in a good position because our spouses do understand that. But when you get home and at the end of the day you're struggling, I think, with what we say, are we honest? Do we give detail, or do we give kind of a paraphrase of what had happened or some summary of what had happened at the day? Your point, I think, is valid of saying, look, we got to be honest to our spouse. Our spouse, I think, inherently, unless we're federally indicted in mob activity, is probably not going to turn us in, for saying something. Right. Like I could go home and talk to my wife and say, look, this, I had a bad patient today. This happened. They were really depressed. This is where it affected me. Or, hey, I had this crisis call where X, Y, and Z happened. I could talk to her. She could understand it. But I think the average therapist, the average officer goes home and you have that hesitation. But you should be honest.
No, and my wife's got an advantage over me because if I decide not to tell her what happened today, she's going to open her email and she's going to read the shift duty reports and she's going to know everything that happened because I wrote the duty reports. But the spouses that aren't in the profession, the spouses that aren't working with the police and in critical care, emergency medicine and things like that, those spouses aren't going to understand, and they don't have the means to check up on us.
Right.
So, yeah, we owe it to them to give them at least a cursory explanation of what we're feeling. And even if you can't talk about what happened that made you feel that way, it's very important to talk about how you're feeling, what you're feeling, even if you don't care to get into the details of why.
And we have to be responsive to secondary trauma or even vicarious traumatization. You don't want to go home with these elaborate stories of the gory details of it, because if you have a spouse that's not involved in this, and then you start telling them about, like several things, like, somebody being, burnt to death in a vat of, molten soup or whatever it is, that happens, they're not going to understand. They're not going to be able to take it in an appropriate way. And then you start seeing them have nightmares, difficulty sleeping, issues in the morning of trusting that you go back to work or whatever it is. Like I said, I guess it goes spouse to spouse, but overall, we don't want to kind of scare our spouses of what the job is.
And that does happen. And I wanted to get into this before we ended the segment.
Right.
In 20 years of doing this, we've seen multiple instances of injuries going both ways.
Right.
Police being injured by suspects being shot or injured by police. And we come in for the critical care afterward. We come in for the stress debriefing. We come in for the peer-to-peer care. And a lot of the times we hear from when a police officer is involved in a shooting where they've had to fire, or when they've been involved in an incident where they themselves were injured, we hear that their spouses, the spouses from outside the profession, have told them, like, this is it. You need to retire, find a different job. I know you're good at something else. I don't want you to go back there. Right. And we've had it happen where the spouses are encouraging first responders, firefighters, EMS, police, to seek a different career, to retire, to resign, to get themselves out of the line of fire. And it's important that we explain to them before something happens, right, what might happen, and that this is the career we chose. I said earlier, we didn't choose to be injured, right, but we chose this career. It's a vocation.
Right.
Right. So we chose this career, we chose this calling. And it's what we want to do. So we need to get them prepared for the possibility that an injury could happen or that a critical incident could happen, and get them prepared to not encourage us to resign, retire, quit our jobs, walk away, etc. And understand that rather than that, we're going to recover. We're going to recover together with them. We're going to get back on the job and do what we love to do, and we're going to try to make it easier on them to cope with, right? So,
well, also and again, to your point, which is excellent, we're in the top 3 and top 5 position of professions that commit suicide. So number 3 are mental health therapists, right? Number 5 are cops that commit suicide, and I have to imagine, or I in my belief system, it's that buildup of stress that creates that. It's not just one critical incident that creates that. It's multiple incidents over a career or over decades of talking to people, rendering aid, and what have you. If we have the spouses that don't understand that that's the part of the job, then ultimately, I hate to say it, they may contribute to those pretty dark feelings.
So I was recently at a meeting of the Division of Wellness Services for the FOP, and at a seminar that our director was putting on. And believe it or not, first responders are really good at dealing with the things we see at work.
Right.
The things that we experience, we're able to compartmentalize the experiences we have. We're able to put away other people's experiences, right? That someone else experienced, someone else's tragedy, someone else's critical incident. We're able to put that away.
Right.
So we can compartmentalize that as it's just the job. It's what we signed up for, right? We're seeing other people's tragedy, and we're really good at not having that affect us. Right. The two of the top reasons that first responders complete suicide is financial difficulty and relationship troubles. Right. And the reason I say that, it's important because a lot of people who do internalize their stress, don't talk to their spouse, don't talk to their significant other, don't find a trusted peer or a trusted counselor. The people that don't find that outlet and internalize it, they try to deal with it in other ways. They self-medicate through drinking, through drugs, and that eventually leads to financial problems. Mm-hmm. You and I know the biggest addiction facing first responders in Delaware is gambling, not substance, right? Yeah. And that's going to cause financial problems. Right. But on the other side, since we're talking about relationships, if you're not going home and opening up at least about your feelings and about your experiences, not necessarily the gory details, but how you feel and why you feel that way, and you're just going home and you're being that closed off, jerk at the end of the day, and you're talking ugly to your spouse, you're mistreating your kids, and you're closed off from the relationship, then that's going to cause those relationship problems. Right. So it's not necessarily the tragedy we see; it's the internalizing, and it's the not having an outlet. It's not dealing with it appropriately that leads to the relationship problems and the financial problems, and that's what causes police officers to die by suicide. Right. So it's at the end of the day, it's the relationship. It's not having that outlet, not having that open communication, not necessarily the things we see.
Right. And most officers that I see as patients will come out and say exactly that. As I could deal with the job. The job is actually easy because I can compartmentalize the job. It's getting home and how to explain that and explain my job and deal with the stress of it. I get home and the last thing I want to do is, change the baby's diaper or, take the kids to school or have to go to this next wedding when I literally just want to sit and do nothing. And, that compartmentalization is excellent, but we also need that support like crazy. If you don't have that support, then ultimately you start seeing that erosion of that personality and what have you. So in theory, we say, and in practice, be honest with your spouse. Go home, talk about what happens throughout the day. You don't have to give details. You don't have to give anything more than what you want to give, but make sure that you open up and talk about it. Going to the bar, getting really wasted, probably not the best way to deal with things. We're not saints here. We will have a shot in the beer to decompress, and I think that's part of that natural process sometimes. But remember, going home and talking to your spouse is exceedingly important. I think also talking to the kids is important.
And give them a chance to ask you questions.
Yeah.
And then meter your answers, right?
Yep.
Don't be graphic in detail, but give your spouse and your children the chance to ask questions. Why do you feel this way? Why were you in a bad mood? Let them ask you about your day, and then be honest about your feelings about your day.
Right.
So the communication's got to go both ways.
It's that weird, be feely, the emotions. Oh, Who would deal with that with first responders? Well, I guess we would. Anyway. So thank you for the question. That was, again, coming from our friends over at Lodge 5 from the SOP over there. Thank you. You guys are awesome. We're going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to go into our second session today for our next topic to it. Remember, go to thecopandtheshrink.com. You can get us on Facebook. You can get us on Instagram. You can get us on Twitter. I think we're going to also do the TikToks. And again, we're still debating on the OnlyFans, but make sure you get some merch. We got those T-shirts, those hats, and all that great stuff. So again, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you stay with us for our next topic. Again, thecopandtheshrink.com. Thanks.
The Division of Wellness Services of the National Fraternal Order of Police is committed to leading the efforts to ensure the well-being of law enforcement officers. The FOP intends to no longer react to issues of critical stress affecting its members, but instead take a pre-act approach that is driven by trained peer support, research, empowerment of officers, awareness and stigma reduction, connections to service, and ongoing training and development. Information about the Wellness Division, resources, and publications can be found at fop.net/officer wellness. Donations to the National FOP in support of their Division of Wellness Services and other programs can be made online at nfop.firstresponderprocessing.com.
Welcome back to the Cop and the Shrink. I'm obviously the Shrink. That's the Cop.
I'm the Cop.
We are we're riffing on the F word. I think that's been used a lot, but we'll talk about that. Remember, go to thecopandtheshrink.com. Go to us on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, possibly TikToks. We'll figure that out. But also go to our YouTube channel where you could watch this podcast because, we're doing so much here sitting and talking. we eventually will probably play videos. The other thing, too, we have this up here. The blue line flag. We've been talking about something in the back. If you are listening to this and you want something different in the back, we're thinking of American flag. We're thinking of another blue line flag. Our producer, my son Denny, was thinking something like Naruto or something in anime, which might not be appropriate. But if you have thoughts in the background, give it to us. We actually could buy a Cop and a Shrink tapestry for the back here, but we're not. We're not today. Maybe tomorrow we might, but we might. So anyway, the next topic I thought would be kind of interesting. So our first topic was, what do we tell our spouses during those critical incidents? How do we help relieve stress? How do we help them understand the jobs? Next topic, I think, is if you are in the practice of dating a mental health therapist or dating a cop, but also understanding the characteristics of police and mental health folks. And I want to start pretty simple with some of the characteristics to it. I've heard a mixed bag of things, and I got a story, and the story's kind of funny.
Can't wait.
What's that?
I can't wait.
Yeah, the story's kind of funny. So I was at a reception, and I won't give any names, but was at a reception. A guy came up to me, and he had heard from my spouse that I was a mental health therapist. And he walks up to me, and I won't say his name, whatever. Guy knows who he is. If he's actually listening, I hope he's taken a big piece of humble pie and have swallowed it like a jagged little pill. But he came up and he says, "Hey, I heard you're a psychologist." And I went, "Yeah." And he goes, "Yeah, so you must be a Democrat." And I went, "How do you figure?" And he goes, "Well, you therapists are kind of fuzzy and warm, and you're very liberal, and you want people to understand themselves, so you must be a Democrat." I said, "Well, okay." I said, "What do you do for a living?" He said he was a bookkeeper. And I said, "That's funny." I said, "I heard all bookkeepers were jerk-offs." And he just looked at it. He goes, "How do you figure?" And I said, "Well, because you're pompous, you think you know things, you walk up to people that you've never ever met before and automatically assume their political affiliation. I heard bookkeepers are jerk-offs. Is that right?" And he's like, "Well, no." And I said, "Well, not every therapist is going to be a Democrat." I said, "In fact, I'm a registered Republican. I was the president of the Young Republican society. That's a scary thought. I have voted based on what mental health bill each president has. And by the way, some of them have had terrible mental health bills. Other ones have had beautiful mental health bills. But I take that story to go into the characteristics. He told me what he thought about mental health therapists. That he said flat out, we're warm, fuzzy, almost, I would say, asexual people. That our whole goal in life is to make people happy. And I didn't take offense. I took offense to it. I was going to say I didn't take offense to it, but I did take offense to it because I didn't align myself with those characteristics.
But there has been that perception of mental health going on through the years. When I started on the job in the mid '90s, we didn't have much of a peer support program. We didn't have much of a first responder mental health program. There's really not a lot of help, and we've come a long way. But and one of my favorite supervisors ever, he insisted we call him Uncle Jerry. I love Uncle Jerry. He's one of the favorite people I ever worked with, favorite people I ever worked for. And I remember when I first got into the stress management and the peer support, and I showed up on a scene, and Uncle Jerry was supervising the scene. And he said, no, just get the hell out of the way for a few minutes. We don't need your fucking hugs out here right now. We've got other things to worry about. And so there's been that perception, right, that critical care and the peer support and things like that has to be all warm and fuzzy and huggy, and it's not necessarily that way, but that's been the perception. So maybe that's why Toby thought you were a Democrat. I don't know.
Don't know. I'm not going to party with him anytime soon, so that's fine. So it goes into those characteristics with it, but and I put it out on on Facebook, and I had a couple of interesting responses to it, some text messages from my post and all about the characteristics of policing and of mental health, which some of them were exceptionally awesome, and then other of them were pretty bad, exceptionally bad. But there were also crossovers. One, you saw loyal was a really good characteristics, that both a police officer and mental health person are very loyal to their people, meaning that they're loyal to patients, they're loyal to the community, they're loyal to each other, and so forth. I thought that was really good. Second one was that they were trustworthy, which sometimes I struggle in our society right now to understand that we're still viewed as trustworthy.
And I think that really depends on who you're talking to.
Right.
If you're talking to someone who's in a relationship with a cop or a therapist, or someone who's looking to be in a relationship with a cop or a therapist, obviously they wouldn't be if they didn't see that trait, that trustworthiness. Now, if you're talking about the general public at large, you see a lot less of that perception of trustworthiness than you used to.
Right.
But we're just talking about relationships here, so we'll get into that.
We'll get into the public at large.
So some of the things, people will see the police as like rigid, like rules are rules and they're rigid. Right. People will see them as judgmental. People will see them as, like we talked about Charlie, like we talked about some of the cops that come home and just lock themselves in their home office. They're just like closed off.
Right.
And they don't share a lot. They're not real warm and feely. So there are different perceptions, right? You get the loyalty, you get the protective, you're protective of the family, protective of the significant other. You get those things as positive traits, but you also get closed off and rigid, arrogant. We're both called arrogant.
Yeah.
We're both called narcissists. So you get that a lot as well. So there are different perceptions, I think, depending upon
we had a commercial there.
Who's being asked, and depending upon what their goal is, right? Do they want to be in a relationship with you? Do they want to see the positive things? Everything's rose-colored lenses at the beginning of a relationship.
Well, and I think I like how you said arrogant and narcissistic. God-like tendencies was another one I heard. You seem God-like, like you're an overseer. And I said, look, it becomes a hazard, I guess, an occupational hazard. Like if somebody comes up to me and says, oh, don't shrink my head, oh, don't diagnose me. I've done that within the first 30 seconds of meeting you.
I'm already done.
Yeah, I'm already done. An officer has already figured out if you're a good guy or a bad guy. They've already kind of locked you up a little bit. With us, I've listened to 2 words that you said, and I've already passed judgment on you. And I'm sorry about that. I've already diagnosed you. I've already kind of figured out, what you're about. And I think that becomes an occupational hazard, but it also comes out as very arrogant and narcissistic.
Well, the old saying, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, right? I think that's especially true with us.
Right.
Because we walk through the world sizing people up. Who's a threat? Who's a friend? Who's an ally? Who's not? Who do we not trust? We walk through the world sizing people up. And, if that first impression is an equality one, it's shot. Like
you're done.
Done with you.
You're done. I had a guy years and years, everybody kept saying how decent this guy was. He was a good guy. He was a good guy. And the whole time I had said, no. There's something up with this guy. I don't like him. There's something going on with this. And a year's going on. And, he's in the first responder community. Years of this where I said, I'm talking like, 20 years of this. I don't like this guy. There is something really wrong with this guy. And then something very egregious happens. He's arrested, all this, hubbub that occurs about him. And people looked at me and said, well, how did you know? And I was like, oh, that's part of the job. It's not me being a dick, for anything else. It's truthfully taking all those years of education, those 4,000 years of education and all the experience that I've had. And now I'm looking at somebody and I'm diagnosing them in the first 30 seconds.
People like to dismiss the principle of instinct, but we all have it. Like we all know, we get the little hairs on the back of our neck. We all know that something's not right.
Yeah.
And some people that might be interested in relationships might find that a little bit of a turnoff, right? You're judgmental. That's where that judgmental comes in. We call it instinct. They call it judgmental. They call it
potato.
Right.
But it's true. I think that could be an exceptional turnoff when you're going to meet with their friends. You start dating somebody, and here they come around. Hey, by the way, here's Harold. I'm gonna bring my boyfriend here to meet you. And I it probably wasn't the first time with Sarah, but he's going to meet, and there he is. And then they look at you and go, well, you're a cop, aren't you?
So you know what? I've had the benefit of this in my relationship. The whole family is in emergency services. Right. The whole family, right? Sarah's mom was a flight nurse, a trauma flight nurse, and Sarah's dad was a state trooper, and my dad was in the Navy. My brother was in the Army, and so we're like an emergency services family, right? Nobody's getting anything over on anybody. Right. But like we talked about in the first segment, not everybody has those benefits, and you have people who intermarry. Right. Corporate and cop. Right.
But that's that first meeting of it is that they have these preconceived notions of the cop. We've talked about this. What's that first question that most people are going to ask a cop?
What's the worst thing you've ever seen?
And in your first meeting, do you actually say that? I mean, there's a theory behind it, right?
Right. No, I've got a remedy for that. I've been telling people for years. I've been telling my officers for years. There's a remedy for that. Let them ask you all year long and kind of put them off. And then at Thanksgiving dinner, at the dinner table, when everyone's about halfway through, let somebody ask you again, what's the worst thing you've ever seen? And at that point, be brutally honest about the worst thing you've ever seen. And nobody who was at that table will ever ask you that stupid question again.
Yeah. Mine is always, and again, if we go with that one, it's always, well, what's my diagnosis? Or tell me about it. And it's funny, if Laura, I hope she is, I don't know. If my wife, Laura, was listening to that, she has unleashed me a couple of times on friends and said, okay, go ahead. Dennis, go ahead. And then I've broken them down a little bit to the point where I've had people cry. And it's not okay, and I think that's where it comes across as this very strong personality in both worlds. That hey, this isn't. It's not just us. It's the experience within our profession that's creating part of these characteristics. We've always said, and I've always said, and contended that the badge picked you from the beginning, and you just basically put the badge on at one point. And I think that's the same way with mental health. Is that you were kind of akin to this. You had that personality trait. You had that almost, I don't know, predestination to become what you become. But then once we're in that position, that's when those characteristics become a little bit bigger.
Right. Okay.
Something like that. So again, in that dating world, and we put it into that dating world as we talked about the spouses before and how to help them. I think in the dating world, that's another one. Do you have, somewhere along an online certification, the dating first responders 101, and this is the way it is. Understand a volunteer firefighter will want to always be at the firehouse. If you want to date a firefighter, they will always want to be at the firehouse.
Join the auxiliary because you're going to be there with them.
You want to date a cop, remember that if you're at a concert with them, they're not watching the stage. They're watching everybody around the stage to see who's doing something, right? If you're out, with a mental health therapist, understand that they have already made diagnosis to everybody in that room.
You want to see something funny? Go out to dinner with two cop couples. You'll see the cops fight for the seat that faces the door, right? And in some cases, you might end up with two cops on one side of the table and two spouses on the other side of the table because the cops can't come to an agreement. You'll watch cops race for a table to get the one that faces the door. And that's just, is it paranoia? Is it hypervigilance? I don't know. It's just habit.
It's characteristic to it. It's funny because we play a game, Laura and I play a game of talk about the couple next to you. So we'll pick a table. This is bad. This is really bad. And remember, she's in critical care. She's a nurse practitioner. She rates people all the time. So we'll pick a table and she'll say, okay, tell me their story. And then I go down and say, well, that's Mary and Joe. They've been together for 20 years. They've kind of lost hope with each other. Both are having active affairs. And we go through it. Now, we've never walked up to that table and said, hey, by the way, what's your story? But there will be one day, I think I will end up having a barren wasteland of shits to give. And I will ask somebody,
hey, Joe, when did you stop cheating on your wife?
I've been dying to ask that question. But I think it's kind of fun. I would never discourage anybody to date a cop or a shrink. I would never discourage it. But know what you're getting into.
Yeah, but let's talk about the reasons why or why not, right? So, like I said earlier, you get things like protective.
Right.
In some cases, maybe nurturing. But you get, it's understood that cops, firefighters should be moderately physically fit. Most are. Some are not.
Some are not.
So you get these positives. You get protective. You get physically fit. You get, most of the time, you have to be fairly intelligent to do the job. You get things like that. But then you also get the rigid, the judgmental, things like that. So there are positives and negatives people have to take into account. And I think that both sides of the relationship tend to gravitate towards people, for the most part, who will understand, right? There's a poster that circulates every time there's an academy class. There's a poster that circulates. It shows the rookie starter kit, right? It's got a picture of a temporary tag, a full arm sleeve tattoo, and a nurse, right? So we tend to gravitate toward, like the ER nurses. We come in contact with the ER nurses every day at work. We meet them. We get to know one another, and at least to some degree, they understand what our job must be like. Not that they've lived it, but that they've seen it, they've witnessed it.
Right.
So some of those things, one of the things that might make police officers attractive to someone else, or make someone else attractive to police officers, is that you go into it knowing that there's some degree of understanding, right? You know that there's going to be some connection there, and that you don't have to explain everything. Like, you're not starting from scratch.
Right. Or at least you kind of hope you don't start from scratch. I want to see that couple that starts from scratch. I think it'd be kind of fun. Let's see where it gets, because, and this brings us to this, is that I looked up divorce rates. Okay. I think this is kind of interesting. The national average for divorce rate among all married people, both for heterosexual and homosexual marriages. Okay. We have statistics now that encompasses everyone, is 55% divorce rate among married couples in the United States. Okay. 55%. The normal mental health therapist that is married, 29%. The normal, and I say normal, and I will explain the difference to it. So just your mental health therapist, your counselor, your social worker, your psychiatrist, psychologist, 29% divorce rate among them. Okay. Now, let's go to cops before I throw in the big one. Cops right now, 65 to 75% divorce rate. Okay, that's above the national average. If the mental health therapist specializes, in trauma care or crisis care, up to 80% divorce rate.
Well, let me throw another monkey wrench at you. Statistics show that if you've been divorced once, you are up to 66% more likely to get divorced a second time. So add 66% to your 80, add 66% to my 75, and look what our chances are.
No, I'm not allowed to get a divorce. I'm not allowed. Laura told me I'm not allowed. Is she at she put new parts in me, and I'm not allowed to get. I'm at 108 years old, and then I'm going to die.
She's going to take her aftermarket parts back.
But, and again, if you look at those rates, it's almost scary to think, like, look, I'm going to get into a relationship with one of these folks and know that divorce rate is so high. So that would go into the understanding of, even in our first section where we said, talking about the feelings, talking about emotions, working with your partner.
And that's why it's important. That's why communication is important. That's why being open is important. And if you don't find someone who already understands, you have to help that person to understand. You have to understand one another. And then we can drive those divorce rates down to non-existent, we would hope. But
we hope. And again, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we also have to understand we are, and 50% of the problem is going to be us. But I think within the mental health world, within the police world, it's 70% us. That 9 times out of 10, the spouses are on for the ride. And we need to communicate more openly, more honestly. We need to be there to say, why our brain is mush at the end of the day. We need to explain that to them. And I think ultimately it's there. So in wrapping up this section, yes, date a cop, date a mental health therapist. Be on for the ride. Know that they're pretty cool. They're damn well loyal. They're very trustworthy. But they could be a little narcissistic. They could be a little rigid.
A little closed off, have some communication problems that you're going to have to overcome.
Yeah, but they're fun. There's some good times to be had. Like I said, you could play the game that I play. Look at the table next to you when you're out to lunch today or out to dinner tomorrow. Play the game. See what you come up with. I think that's kind of fun, and see what they do. Or you could throw in, have they ever been arrested? And for what? That would be a cool game to play. Like, what do you think their conviction is?
What does their arrest record look like?
So, but again, thanks. We came up with that question, but thank you for everyone that responded. We could go on forever with that one. Again, head on to thecopandtheshrink.com. Check out our webpage. If you have any questions or topics that you would like for us to discuss and go over, please send us a line. We have a little contact page. You could send us an email, but go to thecopandtheshrink.com. Also, make sure you get us on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, wherever the Cop and Drink, Shrink, Cop and the Drink. Oh, there we go. Thecopandtheshrink.com may appear. Get us some merch. We got some good stuff out there. We'll be wearing our T-shirts soon. But make sure you get us. Again, we're going to be back for section number 3, but thanks for listening, folks. You have seen their faces and read their stories. Our hospital heroes and first responders are remarkable. Their strength is inspiring as they continue to work around the clock in the fight against COVID-19. Throughout the pandemic, they have had limited downtime and limited access to prepared meals. Our hospital heroes are working in extremely stressful environments, literally placing their own safety at risk to help the sick and dying. Our mission is to show these frontline workers that we, the community they are caring for, supports and cares for them through the simple act of providing them with a prepared meal to help sustain them through the day. To complete this mission, we are partnering with local restaurants to deliver quality food directly to hospitals, urgent cares, testing centers, treatment centers, nursing facilities, and first responder stations. We have delivered nearly 25,000 meals to over 60 locations in Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. We have been honored to help these amazing men and women. The meals we bring are met with such gratitude. In those moments, as the meals are set up, we see their gratitude in the form of tears and laughter. A simple meal can provide hope in the face of this terrifying disease. The Trauma Survivors Foundation's Hospital Heroes Food Drive has the incredible privilege of coming into the worlds of our hospital heroes and first responders at the most difficult time in their lives. For a $6 meal donation, you can help a hospital hero and a struggling restaurant stay focused and positive through the COVID-19 pandemic. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, but we still need your help to see our hospital heroes through this fight. Our heroes are why we do what we do, but you are the how. Your donation helps us provide food and hope to our frontline heroes. Your donation makes hope stronger than fear. Text Hospital Heroes to 44321 to donate a meal to a hero. please visit us at hospitalheroesfooddrive.org to learn more about our mission. We're back. So welcome to The Cop and the Shrink. Remember to follow us on thecopandtheshrink.com. Get us on Facebook, Instagram. We love the likes. We were shooting for, what was it? We were shooting for 7?
7. We wanted 7 followers.
7 followers. We're up to almost 200 on Facebook. We're above 50 on Instagram. So we did it. We
got our 7.
We've done our 7. So very exciting. Hey, just to also put it out there, we do have a couple of products outside of the merchandise on thecopandtheshrink.com. Remember, all of the stuff that we do ultimately goes into the charity, goes into help out the Trauma Survivors Foundation and the Hospital Heroes Food Drive. So please head over to survivorsbeverage.com or drinksurvivors.com. We have our lovely coffees, all different flavors of it. And if you are a cop out there, if you're a first responder, we know that you love your coffees. We know that you love staying awake all hours of the night. I know you and I have been juiced up on coffee, I think, all our lives at this point. So this is actually our cowboy blend, so you want to check that out. Head over to wagonhousewinery.com. You can order yourself what's called the Captain's Punch, which is a sweet Concord red wine, aptly named after Captain Alan Davis, retired from the Chester Police Department. An amazing guy, a great friend, and ultimately the most awesome storyteller that we know. And then you could also head to Big Oyster Brewery and go in with Survivors IPA. Yes, we just want you to drink everything that we have. Survivors IPA is getting reintroduced to the beer world in Delaware on October 9th at the Delaware Beer Fest. So remember, check out the TraumaSurvivorsFoundation.com or .org, and then check us out at thecopandtheshrink.com. So we got current topics, current events. We just had something devastating, which is amazing, that it actually happened up here, and we could go on forever about the global warming and so on, but let's talk about this. We had in one day the 16th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina at the same day that Hurricane Ida had hit Louisiana, Mississippi, and so forth. But there was a huge difference there. Hurricane Katrina, 16 years ago, based on their flood plan, the levees in the lakes, everything going on down there, we had 1,850 dead during Hurricane Katrina, the way that they were set up and the response rates down there. When Hurricane Ida hit, based on everything that they put together, 2 dead in the south. But we had a problem because Hurricane Ida made it up to the northeast where we are, and right now, current total, because they're still going through a lot of areas, especially up in New York. Current total is 60 dead, based on Hurricane Ida when it hit the northeast. And the current event was, what happened? What's our preparedness? What's going on? You know, we've seen images, we've seen a lot of memes. Some of them, you know, funny in the line of in lieu of tragedy. But in Philadelphia, we had the Vine Street Expressway had turned into the Vine Street Causeway, I guess it was. It was completely filled. We had areas of Manayunk, Conshohocken. We had areas of Oxford, Pennsylvania. We've had Mullica Hills, New Jersey.
Wilmington, Delaware was underwater.
Wilmington was under.
Northeast.
We had a total of 8 tornadoes touch down because of Hurricane Ida. What the hell did we do wrong?
So I think that goes to the concept of lessons learned, right? When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, I think the attitude was largely, we've had hurricanes here before, we've dealt with them, we know what to expect, we're good to go, right? And it turns out the aging levee system wasn't ready for something the size of Katrina. The emergency services in the area weren't mobilized soon enough, weren't mobilized in the right places. The federal resources weren't sent soon enough, weren't sent to the right places. And so that really got ahead of them really very quickly. And when I say lessons learned, this time they were prepared. The levees had been reinforced. The levees had been rebuilt. The Army Corps of Engineers was monitoring them. When the hurricane was projected to make landfall, federal resources were mobilized, action plans were implemented in all the emergency services. The Cajun Navy got their boats fueled up. I mean, everything that needed to be put in place was put in place. And so their lessons learned saved, 2,000 lives.
Yeah.
Right. So then the problem with preparedness and lessons learned goes to the Mid-South and the Northeast, right, where hurricanes don't hit.
Right.
Hurricanes don't hit New York City. Hurricanes don't hit Port Deposit, Maryland. And when they come through, when the hurricane made this right turn at New Orleans and came up through the Mid-South and the Northeast, it found places that were not prepared, that were in the situation 16 years later that New Orleans was in when Katrina hit.
Right.
So the emergency services, the federal resources, they weren't ready for it. People weren't ready for it. People thought, oh, I'm getting a flash flood warning. I'm getting a tornado warning on my phone. Not a big deal. Tornadoes don't happen here.
Right,
I'm on the top of a hill. My house isn't going to flood. By the way, I'm on the top of a hill and mine did. So it goes to that, sometimes, unfortunately, you have to experience a tragedy to learn a lesson to be ready for the tragedy to happen.
Right.
And so now New York City, I guarantee New York City Emergency Services is going to have a storm and flood plan. I guarantee that there are people here who are going to think about tornado shelters or safe rooms in their house. People are going to think about buying flood insurance that didn't think that they were going to be flooded because they're on the top of a hill. And so it just goes to that level of preparedness. I think you have to be ready, which is what we try to do with mental health services, right? Like I said, we try to do the stress inoculation, and we try to tell people what to expect, how it will affect them, how to communicate with their significant others, who to seek help from. It all comes back to the degree of preparedness and benefiting from lessons learned.
Even in that lessons learned, I don't remember, maybe I'm wrong, I don't remember a time that we've had in the past 5 years where we're getting hit with these storms, one right after the other. Case in point, Halloween 2019. I'm in the Glen Mills area in Pennsylvania. We were hit by a tornado. Who would have ever thought that in Delaware County, there would be a tornado that came in that literally destroyed, I want to say the count was 25 to 30 homes.
Well, bad things happen in Delco.
Bad things happen in Delco. Thanks, Gritty. But if you look at it, this is an unprecedented time. And I hate to use that term. That term has been thrown around so much, of unprecedented time. But in all truth, it has been the past 5 years where we're seeing these storms amp up like crazy. I mean, I don't remember in my time this violent of a string of storms. I don't, except for now. But it also looks at it, what do we prepare for? And I think one of the things that our lessons have learned is that a lot of times after a tragedy, we run in very quickly and we forget that somebody that just had their house decimated, it takes more than 2 weeks to rebuild a house. That it takes 6 to 9 months sometimes to rebuild a house, depending on resources.
And that's when there's not a national lumber shortage and a national shortage of laborers and workers. So, who knows what those numbers look like now,
right? Especially
in a place like New Orleans where so many homes have to be rebuilt at this point. So there's going to be even bigger lapse there.
When you talk about the lumber issue, oh my God, we just had neighbors that were building a house. They got a quote of this house, and they were building it down at the Jersey Shore, so automatically, the prices are going to be high. I mean, they're building this house down in the Jersey Shore. I think it was the Avalon area. $600,000 was the quote to build this house. Then pandemic occurred. All right? Take a wild guess where their house is. The end result to that house.
$1.3 million.
Yeah, $1.3 million to finalize a house that they were quoted at $600,000 because of the lumber issue. So you got to think about that. 6 to 9 months to build a house, and now we have something that has been completely decimated. Mullica Hill, New Jersey, to be a part of that. That these houses, gorgeous houses. They actually had report that there were the Philadelphia Eagles players had lived in this neighborhood. There was a lot of sports figures that lived in one of the neighborhoods. The houses were, $1 million houses or whatever it is. So now they have to rebuild, and they're going to be $2 million. They're never, it becomes insanity at that point. But that is our shortage at this point. So we have to understand, I think, that the resources are going to take 6 to 9 months, that we need to come in afterwards and constantly check up on these people. What do we do? What do we tell people that might be listening right now on how to help? Like, it's cool that you brought them a lasagna at the beginning, but what should you do in the next 6 to 9 months to help these folks?
So I think we've always done really well at the beginning, right? We always send trauma resources, trauma therapists, first responder peer supporters, stress debriefers. We always send those resources right at the beginning. What we don't prepare for is how long it's going to take, right? And you can't have the same group of first responder peer support. You can't have the same group of trauma therapists stay in a place for 6 to 9 months because they're going to burn out. You have to rotate people in and out. And I don't know if there's ever enough of a plan to do that. And there are some agencies that provide those kind of services that do plan for the long term, right? The Fraternal Order of Police has their DART van that they send out. That's disaster area response team. They send out and they prepare to rotate people in and out. The Green Cross Academy prepares for long-term deployments where they have shifts of people 2-3 weeks at a time. But a lot of time that planning's not in place. So we do well with the initial response. We do well with the acute care, and then it kind of drops off with the aftercare. And sometimes those longer-term effects are the ones that are more damaging, right? So we get people stabilized initially, and then we leave, and then they're left to just ruminate on it and think on it, and meanwhile they're still trying to get their home rebuilt. They're still in a shelter. They're still in a hotel or what have you. Right. And that acute trauma care that was so helpful at the beginning has gone. It's left. Right. And now they don't have those resources locally, or they do have those resources locally but don't know how to access them.
Right. So we gotta make sure, just to put it out there, to stay in it in the long haul. If you want to help, but make sure that you're in it for the long haul. Like I look at and outside with the community resources like churches, things like that where we want to continue a food drive, we want to continue a clothing drive, because these are folks that they may have jobs, but they don't have the resources right now for clothing, for just getting them past that first month, which seems to be the hardest. I know with my experience after getting hit by the tornado, we were out of the house for 6 weeks before we were even legally allowed to go back into the house, when they actually cleared us to go into the house. And it was a struggle. Thank God we had resources, thank God for my parents, but for those that don't have that, we have to be in it for the long haul with them. So Look at our resources, try to figure that out. So outside of tornadoes, have you noticed, because I've noticed, and switching gears a little bit, how crazy people are lately?
So I've been saying for more than a year now, it seems like at some point, segments of the population, people have decided that the law has been canceled, so to speak, right? Like, it just seems like people have decided the law has been canceled. I noticed it early in the pandemic times when travel was still restricted, when no one was permitted to go to work, when people were still supposed to be staying home to flatten the curve. Those of us who still had to go to work still had to go to work. But you get on the highway and, in the morning rush hour when there's normally, 300 cars.
Right.
Now you get on the highway and there are 3 cars.
Right.
And 2 of them are going 100 miles per hour because they figure nobody else is out here. I'm just going to do what I want, right? So it's like the traffic laws got canceled. Principles of traffic courtesy went out the window. But more importantly than that, then it started to seem like the laws against violent crimes against people, and crimes against personal property, it seems like people started to really ignore those as well, right? We've seen, here's your word again, we've seen unprecedented increases, like sudden unprecedented increases in things like violent crime, and increases to levels that we haven't seen in 30 years.
Right.
We were making such good progress. Like the FBI was reporting every year, violent crime was down, homicide was down, rape was down. All these important categories were falling year over year for a long time. And now we're back to 30 years ago crime rates. And there's really, I haven't really seen an explanation for it, except that people believe the law has been canceled.
Right.
And we talked a little bit before the show about this. And I think a lot of that has come from, at least a lot of the discourtesy and a lot of the interpersonal skills, the loss of that has come from, we've put the whole world behind a screen. Right. We've sent people home, told them you can work from home, you can attend meetings from home, you can talk to your friends from home, you can go to school from home. So we've sent people to a place where their only interaction is through a computer screen. You can mute people, you can walk away, you can turn it off and be done with it. And so interpersonal skills have kind of started to be depleted, right? People have forgotten what it's like
to be people,
right. And to interact with other people, right? And so I think that's a lot of it, but that can't explain all of it, because some of the people that are committing crimes, let's be honest, aren't working from home. If
they're actually working from your home,
they're working from your home, right? They're taking your means of communicating with people through a screen. So that explains some of the loss of interpersonal skills, but that can't be the complete explanation for the increases in crime.
It can be, but again, if you clamp people down, I think you look at it in any situation. If you take away, and I think this has been the battle cry since the beginning of the pandemic, you take away people's perceived rights or perceived freedom, then they get pretty violent about it. You take my rights away, all I need is a little bit of a flame to hit that tinderbox, and then we're off and running. Like, a fuse can be lit, and they can move on. It's like being a caged tiger. In societies where socialism is involved, if the government tells you, hey, you got to shut down for 2 months, and that's just how it is, people tend not to react violently to that. In our democracy, we tend to react violently because we feel we're being put on.
Right.
And if we're being put on psychologically, then we want to fight out. So we do really dumb stuff. I mean, think about it. We joke around the Kyles and the Karens of the world. That how many times have you seen people freak out at a convenience store or freak out now on airplanes because of their perceived loss of their rights? Right.
How many times in the past have you seen flights diverted or people duct taped to seats on an airliner because they didn't know how to behave like a regular human being? I don't think
I want to get that drunk one day. Let's be honest about that.
Before last month, I'd never heard of someone being duct taped to a seat on an airplane, and then you hear about it twice in a week, right?
Yeah.
And it's just that, I don't know. It's like a badly socialized puppy.
Right.
It's you're fearful of every change. You're fearful of every new person you meet. You're fearful of new situations because of the perception that you're being clamped down on, because of the perception your freedom's being taken away. And I think what we hit in 2020 was a perfect storm. I think we had the COVID-19 hit, and we had all the restrictions go into place, the quarantines and the lockdowns and the isolate for 14 days to flatten the curve. We had all this happening. 14 days became 30, became 3 months. And so people are starting to feel stir crazy. Schools are canceled. Workplaces are closing down. You're stuck in your home with people you may or may not want to be stuck in your home with. I don't know. And then we have...
just think about that. If you say you were ready for a divorce and all of a sudden you got stuck in the home with your spouse that you want a divorce from, oh my God. The perception that you have of the world right now just is completely horrible.
Well, see, one of the unintended consequences of the lockdown was that domestic violence incidents went up.
Yep.
Like precipitously. Domestic violence incidents went up because people who could formerly play it off and I got to go to work and I'm going to go out, and now they couldn't. They're stuck there, and they have to actually deal with their problems. They don't have those coping skills to deal with their problems, and then domestic violence. But we had this perfect storm, right? We had the COVID hit. We locked everybody in, and then we had a couple of pretty tragic incidents which caused civil unrest, and there was quite a tinderbox there. But I think the combination of the two, I think that people were already fearful and angry and upset. I'll go back to the badly socialized puppy. You already had the puppy cornered, and then you slapped it in the face.
Right.
And the only response was a violent reaction. So I think that one thing happening independent of the other, the outcomes wouldn't have been as bad, and we wouldn't have seen the level of things that we saw. But I think taken in combination, they might have actually fueled one another.
Oh yeah, it's a storm. It's a low cell hitting a high cell, and then all of a sudden it just explodes to it. Look, if we look at the perceived value of rights, we don't necessarily have the right to be a dick to each other. We don't have that right. It's not okay to just all of a sudden believe that you could pop off on somebody in the grocery store. It's not okay for you to challenge somebody based on something that you perceive that they did wrong. And I think we have right now that people believe that they believe that if we're in a situation, and we could look at the cameras and all that we're in a situation, it is our right, quote unquote, our right to jump in and get involved in something that they should not be involved in.
Well, I mean, we've also seen this situation where because using COVID as an excuse, we've seen a lot of decriminalization of things, or a lot of shortened prison terms, or less propensity to jail people for things they formerly would have been jailed for, instead of putting them back out on the street. So we've seen people say, I got away with this, or I wasn't punished too harshly for this, I'm going to do it again. And doing it again, sometimes next time they're doing it worse. They're doing it more frequently. And so we see more crimes being committed and more serious crimes being committed as the system rolls back the level of penalty, the level of consequences for those crimes. We're seeing crime worsen, right? We see what they call bail reform. So they're not giving people secured bails or cash bails anymore, holding them off the street for being violent. They're turning a lot of violent people back onto the street, or they're not jailing people who formerly would have been jailed, thinking probation's going to do the trick. Listen, if they were good at following the rules, they wouldn't be on probation to begin with, right? So probation really doesn't make much of a difference in a lot of cases. Well, but that might be contributing to this rise in crime as well. Like they thought they were doing a good thing by letting people out of prisons and shortening terms, and they've just turned people with those propensities back out into the world and made the consequences less important.
Turning people back into the world before we wrap up the section. Sirhan. Are you kidding me? He shot Bobby Kennedy, and all of a sudden he's now on parole. And mind you, yes, he was in jail for 52 years, but the man's still in his 70s. I would think that was immediate. You're not seeing the light of day ever. And then all of a sudden it came out. Somebody said, no, he's cool. Let's give him parole. He's out.
Hinckley as well.
Hinckley.
So a guy killed an attorney general. A guy tried to kill a president. They're out here in the world with us.
They're out. It doesn't make any sense. The last one before we go, we had written this down. We talked about it. It is not a law yet. It is not a law in San Francisco. But we write down that shoplifting up to $1,000 may be decriminalized in San Francisco. Shoplifting of up to $1,000 may be decriminalized in San Francisco. I will take that flight out there. And so our backdrop here, we could put in a 52-inch flat screen.
Right.
If we could walk out of somewhere with a 52-inch flat screen and it's decriminalized, I'm not getting in trouble. You're not getting in trouble.
I might get in trouble.
Well, you might get in trouble. I'd probably get in trouble too.
You and a producer can go.
Yeah. Daddy and I are going to take a flight out to San Francisco. We'll go in separately so we can get two of them.
Oh, there you go.
It's the world that we live in right now, but we're still in a good spot. We just got to be better to each other. We got to learn how to people again.
Yeah.
Christ, if dogs could socialize, why the hell can't we? It's all about the dogs.
We've forgotten how to people.
Good show today, my friend.
Yes, sir.
Episode 2 of The Cop and the Shrink, and we hope you enjoyed it. Remember, if you have any questions, any topics you'd like us to answer or talk about or discuss, go to thecopandtheshrink.com under our contact section. Please send it there, or message us on Facebook or on Instagram on the interwebs or anything like that. Again, thecopandtheshrink.com. Remember, everything goes to the TraumaSurvivorsFoundation.org or the Hospital Heroes Food Drive. Please give of the heart. Please give of your soul. We want to make sure that we get up to, at least by the end of the year, I'd love to give out 50,000 meals by the end of the year. I think it's doable.
It's a lot of meals.
It's a lot of meals, but I think it's doable. We'll see. By the end of the year, I don't know. Maybe we'll get there. Maybe we won't, but it's doable. Good stuff.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here.
We'll see everybody next week.
Talk to you soon.